using information theory of how many scientific facts were known at each period of history and try to find a pattern in it. He took all the knowledge possessed by the Roman Empire in 1 AD and took that as his fundamental unit and asked how long it took that to double. To make this more vivid and to popularize Angela's work, I have called that unit 1 Jesus, because generally in science the basic unit is named after a famous individual, like the volt is named after Volta, the farad is named after Faraday, the ohm is named after Ohm, and so on. And so I call all the knowledge that the human race had accumulated until up till 1 AD, most of which was being processed through Rome, I call it 1 Jesus. Now, how long did it take that to double? It took 1,500 years to double, according to Angela. And by 1500 AD, we had 2 Jesus of knowledge in the human intellectual order. At this point, the center had shifted from Rome to northern Italy, to the large banking families like the Medicis, and was centered around places like Florence. And the world had changed quite a bit. In 1 AD, starting from Thailand and moving gradually west to Rome and north to India and China, knowledge of what the world is made of had gotten as far as knowledge of 9 chemical elements. The curious thing is they didn't even know they knew 9 chemical elements. They knew these elements, but they didn't know they were elements. They thought there were only 4 elements. By 1500 AD, they knew about 11 elements, but they still didn't know they were elements, and they were still thinking in terms of 4 elements. The pattern of movement of knowledge and wealth from east to west was still continuing. The next doubling occurred by 1750. That only took 250 years. The first doubling took 1,500 years. The second doubling took 250 years. We had 4 Jesus in our intellectual storage by 1750 AD. And by then there was no doubt the intellectual and mercantile center of the world was England, London specifically, and also the universities of London and Edinburgh and Trinity College Dublin, and the universities around the British Isles. That's where all the knowledge was being processed. Everything eventually arrived there wherever it was being discovered. Most of the discoveries were being made there. The steam engine came out of the British Isles. Most of the new elements discovered between 1500 and 1750 were discovered in the British Isles, with a small smattering discovered in Finland and France and so on. There was hardly any chemical elements were discovered in southern Europe after 1500, due to the activities of the Holy Inquisition, I believe. By 1750, the center of knowledge and power had moved to London, and England was a much bigger empire than Rome ever was. England was the first empire in history of which it could literally be said, as it was said, that on this empire the sun never sets. And knowledge having doubled in 250 years, where previously it had taken 1,500 years for knowledge to double, after 1750 there came a great upsurge of interest in the doubling of knowledge, the accumulation of knowledge, and the possibility of change. Up until 1750, hardly anybody had thought of change at all, except Heraclitus, who said everything flows and you can't step in the same river twice, and a few other gnomic aphorisms like that. But after 1750, there was a great deal of speculation about the possibilities of change. There was so much speculation about the possibilities of change that change started happening rapidly. Shortly after 1750, there was the American Revolution, followed by the French Revolution, followed by the First Mexican Revolution, followed by the Bolivar revolutions all over South America, followed by the uprising of the United Irishmen in 1798. And the spirit of revolution was definitely in the air all over the Western world. And while these political revolutions were occurring and monarchy was in the process of beginning to collapse, another revolution was happening. The Industrial Revolution, ushered in by James Watt's steam engine, which he created in 1765. A few years after that, Lavoisier discovered the correct definition of an element, and scientists got their thoughts clarified. They realized there weren't 4 elements, but many, and they had a total knowledge of 19 elements at that point. By 1900, knowledge had doubled again. This time it only took 150 years. First doubling took 1,500 years to bring us to 2 Jesus. The second doubling took 250 years to bring us to 4 Jesus. The next doubling took 150 years to take us to 8 Jesus. And the next doubling only took 50 years, and by 1950 we had 16 Jesus. So you see, the process was accelerating. Meanwhile, between 1750 and 1900, the tendency was for the, as knowledge doubled, for the center of knowledge and power to continue to move westward. In 1892, Brooks Adams, one of the first futurists, one of the first philosophers to attempt to think about the future scientifically, noted this westward movement of capital throughout history. He didn't know about Thailand and the Bronze Age and that, but he noticed that capital from Babylon on had been moving westward, from Babylon to Egypt to Greece to Rome and up to London and so on. And he perceived in 1892, just before the next doubling ended in 1900, he perceived that knowledge and power were gradually migrating from London to New York and Boston, and he saw an American empire growing up to replace the English empire, which indeed has happened since then. He saw the shift of capital moving from London to New York, as indeed happened between 1900 and 1950. The British Empire had pretty much collapsed by 1950, and the American Empire was already in rambunctious existence all over the planet, just as Brooks Adams predicted. Now the pattern is, to make it a little clearer, first doubling took 1,500 years to bring us to 2 Jesus. The second doubling took 250 years to bring us to 4 Jesus. The next doubling took 150 years to bring us to 8. The next doubling took 50 years to bring us to 16. The next doubling took 10 to bring us to 32. The next doubling took 7 years to bring us to 64. That was in 1967. And the next doubling only took 6 years, and by 1973 we had 128 Jesus. So this is a very rapidly jumping function, which is why I call it the jumping Jesus phenomenon. There hasn't been any really detailed studies since Anderle to show how fast knowledge has been doubling since then, but it's obvious that if you study the number of patents granted per year, the number of scientific papers published per year, that knowledge is doubling even faster. And with microprocessors and networking and so on, it's doubling so rapidly that some have guessed that it's doubling every year now. This has never happened before in history, but we've been building up to this all along. To look again at Toffler's model, first there was the spread of agricultural civilization with god kings on top, which took millenniums to spread across the world from Thailand, and before